Welcome to the Underline This podcast, the podcast where we unpack the big ideas hiding in the margins, because the best parts, they're between the lines. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick is a futuristic book that predicted a world where empathy erodes, technology blurs identity, reality becomes optional, and humanity is defined not by biology, but by connection and moral choice. We're going to break down this episode with a summary, a background of the author, key themes, and underlined quotes and ideas. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick takes place in post-apocalyptic, dust-choked Earth after a catastrophic world war. Most humans have fled to Mars, and those remaining live in decaying cities with radiation-damaged fauna and intense loneliness. We follow Rick Deckard, a bounty hunter, tasked with, quote, retiring, which essentially is killing, 6 escaped Nexus 6 androids, machines that have been engineered to look, act, and feel almost entirely human. Deckard sees the job as a path to owning a real animal, which is the ultimate status symbol in a world where most animals are extinct. And as Deckard hunts these androids, he begins to question, what separates a human from a machine? Can empathy truly be measured? And the moral cost of killing beings who may be more alive than some humans. And the parallel plot follows John R. Isidore, a cognitively damaged man who befriends the fugitive androids and becomes a lens for their desire for identity, purpose, and survival. And by the novel's end, Deckard's convictions break down. His work, faith, and understanding of humanity collapse into a moment of existential clarity. An ending that's more spiritual than triumphant, more reflective than resolved. Now to talk about our author, Philip K. Dick, who was born in 1928 and died in 1982. Philip K. Dick is one of the most influential voices in sci-fi. He wrote with Paranoia, Questions of Identity, and The Fragility of Reality. And the relevance in life context, Dick lived through the Cold War, nuclear fear, government distrust, and a rapidly mechanizing society. He was a deeply spiritual being, troubled and philosophical, struggling with mental health, drug use, and existential doubt. And his twin sister actually died in infancy, shaping his worldview on what it means to be half of something. His motive for why he wrote this book is that he feared a future where humans are emotionally detached, and that technology outpaces morality, and empathy becomes the last measure of our humanity. He wrote this novel partly in response to the Vietnam War, rising automations, urban alienation, and the question, if machines can mimic us, then what exactly makes us human? And something else I'll bring up about Philip K. Dick is that he is the author of The Man in the High Castle, which is a great series on Amazon, highly recommended. Also an interesting book. Now we're going to talk about key themes. First, what makes someone human? The book questions whether humanity is biology or behavior, especially when androids show creativity, fear, self-preservation, and sometimes more empathy than people. Next, empathy as the moral core. Within the book, there's a method called the Voight-Kampff test, which measures emotional responses, treating empathy as the one thing androids lack. But the story constantly destabilizes this premise. So, as an android is being hunted and has been captured, there's the Voight-Kampff test, which measures to see how much empathy it has. And so there's questions asked about killing animals and abortion and topics that would require an individual to show some form of empathy. Next, authenticity versus artificiality. From electric animals to manufactured religions, society operates in layers of imitation. Now, are humans any less artificial in their rituals and desires? Next, we have decay and environmental collapse. The dying animals symbolize moral and ecological decline, and the world feels spiritually exhausted, mirroring Cold War anxiety and the modern climate dread. Next, we have the illusion of reality. Dick invites the reader to question perception. How much of our moral certainty is just conditioning, things that we've been taught to feel, and it's going back to that question of is this nature or is this nurture? Next, we're going to talk about major symbolism. The electric sheep. Deckard's electric sheep symbolizes the hollowness of performance, the desire to appear moral rather than be moral, and humanity's longing to replace what can't be replaced. It becomes a metaphor for living a life that looks authentic without being authentic. Something interesting to note about the electric sheep is that one reason why animals are such prized possessions is that it's not only because animals are almost extinct and having one is a status symbol, but it also is a way for humans to feel empathy because they have something that relies on them, something that they also have to take care of and learn to love and they learn to care for. And what's scary about this to me is that in the modern day, we see modern day electric sheep, whether it be AI girlfriends or it be people having conversations with their AI bot, whether it be ChatGPT or Claude or Copilot. People are finding ways to try and create inauthentic connection when really the substance that we get and the joy that we get from the things that we're trying to replace with AI in these unnatural scenarios comes from connections with human people and real things. And electric sheep, again, are those things that are inauthentic and artificial, where really we're trying to replace something that really shouldn't be replaced, which is connecting with other people. Next, androids. They represent the parts of humanity we ignore: ambition without empathy, rationality without conscience, and the ways we mechanize relationships or jobs. Next, mercerism. Now, this is a communal, VR-like religion that relies on shared emotional experiences. It symbolizes the craving for connection in an isolated world and the manufactured nature of that connection. Real animals. Now, we mentioned this before, but owning one is the ultimate moral and social achievement. They symbolize care, responsibility, reverence for life, and the scarcity of animals highlight the consequences of ecological neglect. Now we're going to talk about movie adaptations. And one of the major movie adaptations that was inspired by Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is the 1982 movie Blade Runner, which was inspired by, not faithful to the novel, and some of the key distinctions between the two are that in the novel, the tone is very philosophical, spiritual, surreal, psychologically tense. And in the film, it's much more noir, cyberpunk, stylish, visually driven. And Deckard, in the book, he's married, insecure, exhausted, and morally shaken. And in the film, he's stoic, solitary, and hardened. And animals are central to the book, and in the movie, they're non-existent. Now, mercerism. This is a major part of the book's philosophy, and it's completely removed from the film. Now, if you're wondering what is mercerism, mercerism is a religious and philosophical system centered around the figure of Wilbur Mercer, who represents human suffering and interconnectedness. Androids and the replicants. So in the book, it's more clearly other, though still emotional. And in the film, it's often more soulful than humans. The endings. The novel ends in an existential, almost religious revelation. And the film ends with a noir ambiguity, tongue twister here, noir ambiguity about identity and freedom. So in these adaptations, Blade Runner 2049 captures more of Dick's spirit, the identity, the loneliness, but still doesn't adapt the plot. And with the culturally significant or uniquely impactful points, I want to mention that this is a book that has had a rich legacy on today's culture. Now, in more nuanced areas, what I mean by that. So, for example, it helped define the aesthetic of cyberpunk. If you're familiar with the video game and kind of that genre, although it's not cyberpunk itself, this novel inspired the foundational mood of the genre, which is neon decay, techno identity, and existential grit. Next, it was also one of the first great sci-fi works about AI morality, which is extremely relevant to today as we're beginning to incorporate AI into so many different facets of our life, whether it be work or even just in personal life, or using it as an assistant. And long before modern AI, Dick predicted our ethical dilemmas about consciousness and simulation. And some of the questions that we're seeing today about whether or not things are moral is when we see work someone else's work being recreated. For example, we've all heard 50 Cent's music that's been recreated by AI, but it sounds like kind of 1950s blues. I think it's awesome, but at the same time, it's taking someone else's work and it's just plugging it into a machine that's recreating it. So that's just one moral. I mean, that's just one moral question. Another one could be AI girlfriends, if that's really moral or okay. Next, a story that ages better over time. Now, as technology blurs emotion and automation replaces human roles, the novel feels more relevant now than in 1968, which is when it was written. Now, empathy as a skill, not a trait. Dick suggests empathy is the last thing tethering us to humanity. And in the book, he says it's fragile. Next, the ambiguity is the point. So the book resists neat answers. It's built for discussion and because every scene can be interpreted in multiple ways. All right, let's also talk about some more modern legacies. Next, we have what makes someone, quote, human. Again, by today's standards, we're looking at AI, robots, digital personas. The entire book is built around the question, is humanity defined by biology or by behavior? Now, in the story, androids look and act like humans, forcing people to rely on empathy tests to distinguish them. Now, why is this relevant now? AI models like ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, and deepfake avatars blur that line between human and machine interaction. So we're asking, can AI feel? Should AI be treated ethically? Where do we draw the boundary between personhood and simulation? Next, we have empathy as the core of humanity. Today, there is a decline in empathy. There's online cruelty, trolling, and detachment. Now, empathy is the book's moral center. Humans show care for life, androids struggle with it. And the decay of real empathy in the world is a sign that society is losing its humanity. Now, why is this relevant now? In Jonathan Haidt's Anxious Generation and other researchers show Gen Z has lower face-to-face empathy. Social media rewards outrage and shame rather than compassion. For example, think about all the trolling that happens. And also think about some of the cruel things that a person might say to someone because they're behind a screen, because they don't get to see the consequences of what they're saying or their actions. So there's really this cruelty because there's that digital sponge that prevents people from seeing the effect that they're having. Then digital isolation also makes it easier to dehumanize others. And people treat celebrities, public figures, and even strangers online as if they're NPCs. Now, Dick's warning hits hard. Losing empathy makes us mechanical, ironically, turning humans into androids. So as we begin to immerse ourselves in a digital world and with outsourcing some of those traits and skills that make us human to AI, the more we become like robots. We lose our ability to think, to create, to feel, and to connect. Next, technology replacing authentic experience. So today we have social media, VR, algorithmic emotions. In the book, people use the mood organ to dial emotions they want to feel. And it's an early vision of synthetic feelings. And modern parallels to this are doom scrolling for simulation, emotional outsourcing to apps, influencers, and algorithms, and VR and AR experiences replacing real-world living, and addiction to dopamine loops via TikTok, Instagram, and X. Pretty scary when someone looks at their phone at the end of the week and they see how many hours they spent on their phone. Another experience I had that kind of hits home with technology replacing authentic experiences is about 2 years ago, I was playing a game called Yakuza Zero, and in it, you're this character and you're going through 1980s Japan, which is very cool, and it's interesting to see how they recreated that time in a video game. And the game itself is very detailed, almost too detailed. You can go into restaurants, you can actually look at individual menus specific to that restaurant. You can see different types of food. You can go to arcades and you can play with machines. You can play on arcade machines. You go out on a date. And the thing that kind of scared me as I was playing this is, why am I doing these things on a game when I can go to downtown Miami and I can go have some real world experiences? And I kind of felt a little disgusted with myself, although it's not like I'm a big gamer, really. But as I was doing this, I just thought, man, this is really sad that people would rather do these things that are easily accessible. You just have to get a car and go. That people would rather do this on a video game, in simulation, versus going out and experiencing life in 4K. Next, we have advertising, consumerism, and manufactured desire, which today is influencers, brand culture, and constant ads. The novel hints that society is shaped by corporations, media propaganda, and engineered aspiration. Now, the modern relevance here is that every platform pushes targeted ads based on our behavior. If I were to talk about a certain company now, it'd probably show up on my Instagram algorithm. And people shape identity around brands. Apple, Tesla, Nike. I mean, when you walk around downtown Miami, how many people are walking around wearing Aloe? Which is a great brand, by the way, not knocking Aloe. And then next, we have AI can predict and manipulate consumer behavior. So this theme feels almost prophetic to what's going on today, where we're building our personas around the things that we buy and we wear. Environmental collapse and extinction. Today, think about climate change, biodiversity loss, and ecological anxiety. In the book, most animals on the planet are extinct due to global catastrophe, and owning a real animal becomes a status symbol of survival. Now, the modern parallels of this are species extinction has been accelerating at record speed. There's pollution, wildfires, heat waves, and climate migration, rising cultural obsessions with sustainability and eco status. Now, Dick was early in saying that ecological loss shapes culture. And something interesting to bring up about this that hits home. I'm originally from Utah, and I remember growing up around Halloween, it would snow. And really, it's kind of towards the end of October and that it was around the end of October when winter would really hit, and there'd be tons of snow. It seemed like every time Thanksgiving or Christmas, around Christmas or Thanksgiving, there's always snow on the ground and things were cold. We were going sledding, and I'm here now. It doesn't feel, you wouldn't recognize Utah if you're comparing pictures from then versus now. It is warm. It is green and it is rainy. And that was something that was predicted about 10, 15 years ago, where climate scientists were saying that Utah's weather was going to slowly transition from being a cold desert with snow during the winter to a more cold and rainy environment. And it's pretty alarming that I'm actually seeing that in my lifetime. It's not something that was like a more gradual transition to that climate. Next, escaping reality through virtual worlds. Today, the metaverse, gaming, and digital identities. So characters use a collective virtual religious system called mercerism, entering an alternate space through devices. Modern day parallels to this are VR worlds like Meta Horizon, VR chat, and digital churches. Gaming communities where people spend more time than in real life, or parasocial relationships replacing real relationships. To add more perspective from my life experience is, again, playing video games where there's not anything unique that they're doing there, but maybe you're running in the mountains when I could be running in the mountains if I was in Utah, or maybe going out in the nature. And also you have people that are, what is it called? I think it's Roblox, where you have people going to mass on roadblocks, which is pretty wild in my opinion. Now, another thing to add too is, do you think people are spending more time and effort in the digital world or in the real world? Now, the scary thing to that is if you're on your phone and it says that you're spending 6 to 8 hours a day on your phone, chances are that's time that could be spent doing something else. It could be having a conversation, could be swimming, running, being outside, hanging out with friends, being with your family, participating in a sport. And I think that's a pretty good indicator of success in life, is the less hours you have in your device shows that you're more plugged into the real life than into your digital life. And the novel shows how virtual spaces can unite people, but very easily manipulate them. And that's what we're seeing today. Next, identity crisis and imposter existence. Today, are we being authentic, or are we just using digital social masks and online personas? So many characters, humans and androids, struggle with identity. And today, people curate online personalities that diverge from their real selves. If you've heard the term NPC, those NPC memes, there's identity anxiety and algorithmic self-image. Androids struggling with selfhood parallels humans struggling in a digital world that constantly compares them to others. All right, last idea here, which is moral ambiguity in a high-tech society. Today, AI ethics, autonomous weapons, and data privacy. In the novel, bounty hunters kill androids, but many androids seem more sympathetic than humans. How does this parallel with the modern day? We have ethical dilemmas surrounding autonomous drones and killer robots. We have drones that we use. I mean, we're seeing this now live in Ukraine, the war there between Ukraine and Russia. We're also seeing drones be used in attacks in the Middle East. And we're seeing robots and autonomous drones being used, again, almost as a case study to see how effective they are. We also have AI-generated misinformation and social manipulation. And we also, we can see who's responsible when an AI makes a decision that harms someone. Is it the AI? Is it the person that created the AI? Is it society for not having better guardrails? Now, in conclusion, the book doesn't give answers. It forces us to face the gray zone. Despite being written decades ago, its warnings seem to become more and more relevant to the dynamic world we live in today. And as we see incredible technology roll out, I can't help but be terrified as our innovations move faster than wisdom. While we embrace convenience, let's not forget to discard those qualities that make us human: creativity, connection, community, and the ability to show empathy. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Please give us a follow on social media by looking for the Underline This podcast, and give us a follow wherever you get podcasts. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.